Hello, everyone. Welcome to Consumer Action's webinar on what to know about scams and fraud targeting young adults. We are so glad you are here. My name is Nelson Santiago, and I'm a Community Outreach Manager with Consumer Action. I'm thrilled that you have joined us today. Before we get into our great program today, I do want to let you know about I do want to acknowledge our funder today, and this webinar is presented with funding from Amazon. We are thankful to the team at Amazon that has helped make this possible. Thanks very much. If you are unfamiliar with Consumer Action, I do want to encourage you to visit our website when you have a moment. You'll find lots of multilingual information to help inform consumers about different topics that impact their pocketbook, including lots of information on scams. One of the resources we have right on our homepage is our Scamgram newsletter. It's a roundup of the scams that we spot throughout the month and put in our monthly newsletter. So feel free to check out the back issues, and you should be getting a copy of it soon since you are joining the webinar today. We're going to dive right into the program because we have a lot to learn from a wonderful team of presenters. If you think about a lot of times when, even at Consumer Action, when we've done education about scams, we have gone out and talked to a lot of senior citizens who are often targets about scams. But if you think about how much time young adults spend online, how much time they spend on social media, and then you also think about how easy it is for younger adults to share things online, perhaps much more trusting of different online sources than some of the rest of us. When you think about that, you wonder, is this a recipe for some real trouble when it comes for scams? You wonder, definitely, there are probably some issues with young adults. And so we are here to learn just about that from this great team that has come together for us. And the speakers have put together a set of slides that we will be walking through today. The idea for today is that this is a train the trainer. We want you to use this information in the community, in your workshops, in your counseling, and your coaching sessions. The information, the slides will be sent to you within a week, and you'll be able to incorporate this into your consumer education efforts. The speakers today include Melissa Lanning-Trumpauer. Melissa Lanning is an executive director of the Better Business Bureau Institute for Marketplace Trust. This is the educational foundation of the International Association of Better Business Bureaus. Mel, as she's known, is the BBB Institute's primary spokesperson and the co-author of several research reports, including the 2023 Better Business Bureau Scam Tracker Risk Report. Under her leadership, the BBB Institute launched a new and improved BBB Scam Tracker, which is the organization's prevention and reporting platform. We're going to hear all about that today from Melissa. Also joining us today is a team from the Federal Trade Commission. We have Emma Fletcher, who is a senior data researcher at the Commission's Bureau of, currently the Division of Consumer Response and Operations. She originally joined the Federal Trade Commission's Bureau of Consumer Protection in 2017 as a Presidential Management Fellow and previously served in the Division of Consumer and Business Education. Currently, she at the Division of Consumer Response and Operations, she focuses on projects at the intersection of data analysis and consumer education. She also authors the FTC's Consumer Protection Data Spotlight publications, exploring trends seen in reports to the FTC's Consumer Sentinel Network. Also joining us from the FTC is Kira Crown. She is a consumer education specialist in the FTC's Division of Consumer and Business Education. She works on various education and outreach campaigns focused on spotting and avoiding frauds, scams, and bad business practices. Prior to joining the FTC, Kira worked on responsible financial inclusion and consumer protection issues at the International Finance Corporation. We're also going to hear in the last segment from Alexander Oticelli, who is an Associate Director of Operations and Business for the Capacity and Resilience Program at the Global Cyber Alliance. The Global Cyber Alliance aims to advance cybersecurity capacity for identified communities and aims to improve their resilience to cyber risk. With a background in international development, working previously as a senior digital specialist at DAI's Center for Digital Acceleration, Alex helped grow DAI's digital development portfolio and guided technical implementation of secured projects across Eastern Europe and Asia Pacific in particular. During this last segment, we will also be joined by Abigail Bishop. She will be co-presenting with Alex. Abigail is the head of external relations at Amazon for scam prevention. There she leads the company's global engagement strategy to protect customers from scammers. She joined Amazon after spending over 15 years in the media and education sectors at the intersection of public affairs, business strategy, and operational transformation. She enjoys connecting stakeholders across the ecosystem to address what she calls gnarly challenges and to make meaningful impact. Thank you everyone for being here. And thank you so much for putting together the great presentations that we are about to unveil here for several hundred members that have joined us today. I'm going to move over to Melissa's portion of the presentation. And if you are there, Melissa, go ahead and get started. I'll advance your slides as you need.
Thank you, Nelson. Thanks for inviting us to be here. If you want to go to the next slide, I am going to spend most of my time talking about a report that we published at the end of 2023 called Targeting Our Youth, How Scams Are Impacting Ages 18 to 24. This is a report that we've learned a lot from, and we're thrilled to share this information with you today. If you want to go to the next slide, Nelson mentioned who BBB Institute is. We are the 501c3 educational foundation of the Better Business Bureau. Our mission is really to foster a trustworthy marketplace, and what we mean by that is we want to make sure that consumers have the information and resources they need to make smart buying decisions and avoid fraud in the marketplace. And of course, the other side of that is to build that network of better businesses that you can trust. And so that's where we get that trusted marketplace. Obviously, we work a lot on scam prevention, and that's part of the research that I'm going to share with you today. If you could go to the next slide. So one thing I just want to say before we jump in, we're talking only about younger ages today, but the one thing that we like to always remind people is that everyone, no matter what age or what group you're in, everyone is being targeted and impacted by scams today. Some of the groups are impacted differently, and I'll show you some of the things we saw when we looked at this age group. But it's really important to remind everyone that everyone is being impacted by this, and by reminding people and breaking down those stereotypes that certain people are more vulnerable. By doing that, we can help to reduce the stigma. So that's, I think, something when you're out talking to people, just remind everyone, yes, we're going to talk about this age group, but just remember, everybody's being impacted by scams today. If you could go to the next slide, please. So this is something that isn't in the report. It was in our risk report, but I wanted to introduce it before we get into the full report. We don't collect information about scams from anyone under the age of 18. However, we have done research the last couple of years. We've done survey research to sort of ask parents if their children have been impacted by scams. And so what you're seeing here is some of the survey research that we did. I just wanted to include this in here because, yes, kids under the age of 18 are being targeted at this time. From what we learned from the parents that reported to us, the number one thing where they were being targeted was social media, followed by gaming platform and text message. I don't think anyone here is too surprised by that, but I did want to include this because we're seeing social media rise in terms of everyone being impacted and running into scammers there. But you can see gaming platforms were number 2 when it came to anyone under the age of 18. So if you go to the next slide. So the report that I'm going to spend most of my time talking about what we call the riskiest scams that came out of this report that we did for this group, ages 18 to 24. And when we talk about the riskiest scams, the way that we define that is we're looking at 3 factors We're not looking at just the volume of the scams being perpetrated in the marketplace. We're looking at exposure, which is, yes, volume of a particular scam type. Then we're also looking at what was the percentage of people who reported losing money to that particular scam type. And then the third piece of that is how much money are people losing to that particular scam type. And that's how we get to our list of the top 10 riskiest scams. So if you go to the next slide, you can see that. And this is the top 10 list for ages 18 to 24. It's a little different, obviously, than the list we have for all consumers, which you can see in our annual risk report that comes out every year. I'm going to dive into each one of these scams to talk a little bit about the impact. But the one thing on this slide that I just want to point out that's really interesting, when we look at the riskiest scams for all consumers of all age groups, online purchase, which is number 2 on this list, is about 30%, and sometimes even more than that. That make up 30% of all the reports being submitted to the scam tracker. So we're used to seeing a really high exposure of that particular scam type. What's unique, though, when we look at this list for just ages 18 to 24, you can see that employment actually eclipsed online purchase for exposure. So what that means is 29 a bigger percentage of young people reported employment scams to Scam Tracker, which is pretty interesting to see because we're so used to seeing that high exposure for online shopping scams. So if you go, I'm gonna focus on each one of these. So if you go to the next slide, I'll start to talk about each one of these because it's important. So again, employment scams made up 30% of scams reported to Scam Tracker by ages 18 to 24. That's huge. Like I said, it's a big deal. That's a huge exposure. So that's really why it's riskiest. Followed by the fact that it had had $1,819 median dollar loss. That's also big. So if you look at all scam types for this age group, the median dollar loss across all scam types is $220. So if you compare $220 to that $1,800 median dollar loss, you see the kind of an impact that employment scams are having. Now, this scam type obviously is when somebody thinks they've gotten a job that they can be approached, and I'll talk about where they're being approached. But basically, it's typically a remote job, real good pay. It's like what everyone was looking for, especially during the pandemic, but even afterwards, like these perfect, really great job opportunities. And then what happens is they're either stealing information from you once you fill out an application, or a lot of times what's happening is they're implementing a fake check scam. So they're telling you that, okay, you've been hired and now we need you to buy equipment, home equipment, or we need to do some sort of training. They'll send you a check, have you deposit it, and then transfer funds to another account, not knowing that's a fake check. And by the time you find out, you're out all those funds. So 43% of the reports for this group mention fake checks. So that's one of the biggest ways the scam is being perpetrated. And then the other thing I would just note is when we dug in, we found that 19% of reports mentioned offering jobs that had to do with reshipping or packaging. And a lot of those times included some sort of other kind of scheme as well. So that's a scam type that for this age group is having a huge impact, and it is a scam type that the scammer is spending a lot of time with the person setting this up. They're doing full interviews, they're spending a lot of time. So the payoff, obviously, as you can see, is pretty good because of that high median dollar loss. If you go to the next slide, please. So the most reported platforms related to employment scams by this age group, Indeed was the #1 place that people said they were actually engaging with a scammer, followed by LinkedIn, and then Telegram, and then Google. And you can see Signal, which I hadn't even heard of before this, is on there, as well as Facebook. So that's where they're typically making contact with the scammer for this scam type. So if you go to the next slide, please. So I mentioned online purchase scams earlier. Those are those online shopping scams. So typically it's you're either searching by Google or you're on social media and you find this great deal that looks great and you go to a place to buy a product. and sometimes it's a fake website, sometimes you're getting counterfeit product, but what it is you're paying for something and then you never get it. Or like I said, you may get some sort of counterfeit product as a result. And this was number 2 riskiest for this age group. It made up 29.9% of scams submitted, just below where employment scams were. The thing about this, it's a lower median dollar loss, so people aren't losing as much money. But if you look at what happens is when they're targeted, this group, 81.4% of people who were targeted in this age group said they lost money. So that's a significant susceptibility rate for them. So a lot of people are losing money. That's what makes this riskier. It's not, they're not losing as much money, but scammers are going out and hitting a lot more people with this, and have with higher percentage of people losing money when they get targeted. So if you go to the next slide, please. So we dug into our research, we dug into the narratives to try to understand what were the products that were being offered for this age group where they were losing the most money. And event ticket sales, that was the number 1 product that was being reported by this age group. So you think about Taylor Swift earlier this year, any of those big names, things that are going out, we're finding right now, we're seeing lots of football ticket scams going out there right now. So that was the number 1 product, followed by salon and nail services, and then jewelry was tied with oral hygiene, believe it or not. And then number 4 was clothing and watches, and number 5 was eyewear. So if you go to the next slide. The number 3 riskiest scam for this age group were, that was what we call cryptocurrency scams. And this can be a wide range of scenarios. It was only 1.3% of the reports. 60% of people who were targeted by this scam lost money. But the bigger thing here is, again, a really high median dollar loss of over $1,400 on average of what people were losing. This type of scam can take many different forms. They may ask you to pay this way, so sometimes it's showing up in the payment method. But more often than not, what we're seeing is fraudulent initial coin offerings, where it's some sort of trying to help set up a company, and it's an investment opportunity. It's really fake. It's never happening. And then the other thing is fake platforms. We're seeing people start to invest in platforms that look real. And this is also being overlapped with romance scams. You've probably heard a little bit about this, but we're seeing a big increase over the last several years of people who are meeting significant others online, who then start to introduce them to crypto and get them into these platforms. And by the time they realize the platform's actually fake, they put in a significant amount of money and then can't get it back. So I'll talk a little bit more about that again later. But that's cryptocurrency scams. And then if you go to the next slide, number 4 riskiest for this age group are rental scams. And again, pretty high percentage of people reported losing money, 69.6%. And then again, a fairly high median dollar loss. If you remember, overall scam types on average 220, but for this one, it's over $1,000 what people are losing. This is when they place those phony ads for rental properties, and they're asking for upfront payments. And so you've paid that money, and then you go and you find out the place doesn't actually exist. There's a lot of ways this is perpetrated. We're seeing this on social media and on a lot of the online classifieds, obviously. And if you look closely, sometimes you can even see in the picture that it's, a palm tree in Baltimore or something like that. So, but there's a lot of these going on. We find them all the time. And this is something that we're finding this age group is being impacted by. So if we go to the next slide, please. So investment scams, number 5 riskiest. And again, pretty high susceptibility, 67.5% of people losing money when targeted, and over $1,300 median dollar loss. They take many forms, but all prey on this desire to make money without much risk or initial funding. So a lot of times, it can be all kinds of different schemes. I won't go into all of them here. We do have a report on this on our website if you want to go into this one specifically. But essentially, there are red flags to know about this, and that is if somebody's promising an opportunity where there's little risk, then it's probably a scam, because there's no such thing as an investment opportunity that has no risk. If they're pressuring you, that's another red flag. And so these can be Ponzi schemes. These can be all kinds of things. And sometimes they come from friends, online friends, or people who are impersonating your friends. We're seeing that quite a bit as well. So that is the number 5 riskiest for this group. If you go to the next, thank you. Fake check scams, number 6, that's number 6 riskiest. I mentioned this one earlier, so yes, I already explained kind of how this one works. It's very much tied with employment scams, but it comes with other scam types as well. So any kind of scam that is asking for an upfront payment or some sort of transfer of funds before you get something can use a fake check scam. So it could be a scholarship scam. It could be a government grant scam, which is when they're promising you a grant, but you have to pay something up front. Sweepstakes, even to get your prize, there's something you have to pay up front. So they can be fake checks. It's a scam on its own, but it's typically associated with another type of scam. But you can see this one's having an impact for this particular age group with a pretty high median dollar loss. Fortunately, only 27.7% reported losing money to this one. So if you go to the next slide, thank you. Phishing scams, number 7 for this group. It's a lower on the list because only 18% reported losing money. It has a median dollar loss of $250. This is just a really common one that's hitting a lot of people. So it can come by your phone, by a text on your phone, or an email, or whatnot. And what we typically say with phishing scams is just be very aware of anything that's unsolicited. If you're getting a text that you weren't expecting, or an email, or anything, just double check. Go to the source of it. Don't go direct. Don't answer or respond. Don't click on any links. This is how phishing scams are typically happen. And there's social engineering involved, which means they may be collecting information that you've posted online on social media. So sometimes they get really complex, and they can use that personal information to make you think that you know the person that's reaching out, including your bank or a friend or whatever it is. So this is all about impersonation. So if you go to the next slide, please. So now, number 8 riskiest, romance scams. This is, again, where you're meeting somebody, typically online on some kind of dating site or social media, and you end up befriending somebody. In the normal, traditional sense of romance scams, what would happen is you build a relationship, and the person would start to have an emergency, and they would start to reach out, and you've gotten to know this person, you build a relationship, and they would start to provide money to help that person out. A lot of times these folks would say that they're living overseas. There's so always a convenient reason why they can't get to meet you in person. And then the other thing I mentioned earlier, which is we're starting to see a lot of high median dollar losses with the cryptocurrencies, where that person that you've built this relationship with is suddenly telling you that they've made a lot of money off crypto, and hey, why don't I show you how to do this? It's really easy and I'm making a lot of money. And so it's like they've built up this trust with you to get you to that point. I would just tell you too, with this particular scam type, we are hearing stories where the scammer will spend months and months getting to know you, where they're literally texting several times a day. So it's one of those scam types where they're spending a significant amount of time with their target. And they're getting a lot back from that. $600 median dollar loss, as you can see from the slide. If you could go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so advance fee loans. This is when you're trying to go out and get a loan. and it's guaranteed, but you have to pay some kind of upfront charges or some kind of processing fee or taxes, whatnot, before you get the loan. And then you pay that fee and the loan never materializes. That's typically how this happens. Again, high $1 million loss for this one. This was number 9 riskiest for this age group. And again, just for any kind of loan, you shouldn't be paying fees up front to get access to that. So that's a huge red flag. And then if you go to the next slide, credit repair debt relief scams. This is number 10. This is on the list for this age group. A very high $1 million loss, $798, almost 50% reported losing money. So this is when somebody has a lot of bills and they're really struggling to figure out how to get out of debt, and they really need help. And so there are these, they pretend to be legitimate service providers who are trying to help. And unfortunately, they're reaching out to the most vulnerable, right? The folks that really need the help, and they really are they can't afford to lose any more money, and try to help, and they pay upfront fees, and then the person never fixes the problem. It's heartbreaking because, again, these are the folks that really need help. And this is one of the scams we warn people: if you've already been scammed and you've already lost money, beware, because they're going to target you with this one next, to try to say, oh, now you're hurting because you lost all this money, let us help. So it's a horrible scam. But again, number 10 on the list. So that's our list of riskiest scams. Just quickly, just contact and payment methods. There's a whole section in this report, if you want to look at it, that talks about the different contact methods and the payment methods. Just some highlights: ages 18 to 24 were more likely to report losing money when they engage with a scammer on website or social media. And then this age group was also more likely to pay than other age groups by digital payment apps or bank account debits. And so again, payment method is really important, how you pay. There are more protections for certain things, but in this case, one good thing is they weren't high on paying with gift cards, which is still an issue. So that was a good thing. So those are some of the highlights for contact and payment methods. And then if we go to the next slide. So all this information is in the report, and you can download it for free. There's a lot of information. It's hard to remember. So one of the things we tell folks is, yes, it's good to know about some of the scams that you're more likely to run into. For sure, that's going to help. But it's also important to just know some general red flags, things to just that should ring a bell for you to say this doesn't feel quite right. So just a few of these things on here. If it feels too good to be true, step back and reassess the situation. If you're being pressured to act really quickly, again, that should be a red flag that something's not quite right here. If this person is telling you not to talk to others, that's a huge red flag. And if you're started up communications on a platform and they're asking you to get off the platform and go somewhere else to have communications, that is another red flag. Payment method, if they insist that you pay a certain way, and a lot of times, sometimes it's gift cards, that's a huge red flag as well. Upfront payments, we've covered several scam types that focused on getting upfront payments, and that's a big red flag. If there's certain things like new jobs and stuff like that, you shouldn't have to pay for those. Sweepstakes, you should never have to pay. So those should be huge red flags. And then the last one I'll just mention is any unsolicited messages that you get. Just be aware of them. If they're coming out of nowhere, don't respond, don't click on any links. Make sure you go directly to your bank or go directly to that retailer and check out your account directly so that you don't actually get connected with a scammer. So if you go to the next slide, please. All the data that was in that report came from BDB Scam Tracker. I know I've mentioned it a few times. You can find it at bdb.org/scam tracker. It's a place you can report scams. Yes, we do share all of the data with our friends at the FTC who are going to speak next. But it's also a place where you can actually read the narratives of reports that have put in. And anytime you're seeing narratives about what happened to other people, some of those stories might stick. So it's always good to sort of scan some of those reports on the platform, which you can do. you go to the next slide, please. We have a prevention guide that's connected there. It has a bunch of, has quizzes, videos, so we know that knowledge is protective. We know the more that you know about this stuff, the more likely you are to be able to spot the situation and just disengage with the scammer. We have a lot of information on there as well, and you can get there straight from Scam Tracker. And then if you go to the next slide, another tool we have that you can point people to. This was launched in May. It's our Scam Survival Toolkit, and this was built out for people who have been impacted by scams. So we know we want to do a lot with prevention, but we can't stop it from happening to everybody, unfortunately. And so this is a new section of our website that includes mental health resources. It includes uplifting messages from real scam survivors, and it provides tailored steps that you can take based on what actually happened to you. So that's brand new. And if you go to the next slide, all those tools you can see, there's sort of before, teach yourself about scams, prevention, it's at our prevention guide. During, if you feel like you're in the middle of it, do some research, find out if the offer that's coming in has been reported to Scam Tracker, or find another third party to talk to. So during the scam, that's a tool you can use. And then after, if you know you've been impacted or you're not even sure, you can go to the survival toolkit to get more information about what to do. And then if you go to the next slide, just has the website for our full report. And again, it is free for you to download. And I will turn it back over to you, Nelson. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was a wonderful presentation. And audience, what did I tell you? We're going to have some information here that you can start using right away. I have a lot of ideas on how to use this presentation and pass the word on. Got a few events coming up, and this is going to come in really handy. So thank you so much, Melissa. We're going to move on now to our next segment, which is presented by the Federal Trade Commission. We will hear from Emma Fletcher, who I introduced to you earlier, the Senior Data Researcher at the Federal Trade Commission, as well as Kira Crown, a Consumer Education Specialist at the Federal Trade Commission. So let me go over to your first slide, Emma and Kira, and go ahead. Hopefully your audio is good. Are you there?
All right, thank you so much, Nelson. So it's terrific to have an opportunity to speak about this topic, and really fascinating to hear the BBB scam tracker data that Mel just presented. FTC's data shows some really similar things, so I can't wait to dig in. I will say that we have some differences in terms of how we classify fraud and in terms of the age ranges that we collect. So I will touch on that just to clarify when we get to those places, because naturally it's two separate databases, so things are a little bit different, but it's really interesting to see how much overlap there is. So, you know, I think as Mel pointed out, it's really important to emphasize that fraud affects every age group. And, you know, the old misconception that this is mostly just a problem for older adults is really problematic. We see that everyone is affected, but at the same time, we know that they are affected differently. So there are actually, it appears, really important differences between age groups and how they're affected. And Mel touched on some of those, and I'll expand on that. So with this presentation, I'll be focusing on ages 18 to 29. So that's the age range that FTC collects. Mel was focused on 18 to 24, so a little bit different. But before I dig into that, I just want to give you the big picture overall numbers. The FTC collects millions of reports about fraud each year. In 2023, we collected 2.6 million reports with 10 billion in reported fraud losses. Keep in mind that the research shows that less than 5% of people who experience a scam report. So when you take that into account, you know, this is just the tip of the iceberg, and the overall numbers are really staggering. Difficult to estimate, but clearly very, very large losses. So the reports that we collect are housed in our Consumer Sentinel network database. And Sentinel is used to identify targets, to spot trends that inform our outreach. It's used by our investigators. It can also be accessed not just by FTC, but by anyone in law enforcement. So when a report gets into Sentinel, it's effectively getting out there to law enforcement at all levels of government. So it's an incredibly useful tool in that way as well, not just limited by the walls of the FTC, but it's a way to get information and reporting data out to law enforcement much more broadly. So next slide, please. So where do these reports come from? Many of them are reported directly to the FTC at reportfraud.ftc.gov. That's our reporting website. But we're also getting reports through our call center in many different languages. And I should also mention Report Fraud is available in Spanish as well. But we're also collecting reports through dozens of different data contributors. So we're getting reports from the FBI, from the Better Business Bureau, as Mel mentioned, from AARP, from companies like MoneyGram, Western Union, and the list goes on. Just a lot of different sources of data, and it's all being pooled into the Sentinel database, and then, like I said, being made available to law enforcement. Next slide, please. So let's drill down on the reports from people ages 18 to 29. This visual shows the top fraud types reported by this age group, ranked by the number of reports indicating a loss. Just like Mel talked about with Scam Tracker, not everyone who reports fraud actually lost money. In fact, in Sentinel, only about 1 in 4 who report actually experienced a loss. Many people are reporting a fraud that they were targeted by, but they avoided losing money on. So for this analysis, I'm looking just at those loss reports. And what this shows is that in the Sentinel database, online shopping is the top scam by number of loss reports for people ages 18 to 29. With 29,000 reports in 2023, 29,000 loss reports. So online shopping is by far the most frequently reported, followed by business impersonation and investment scams. We don't distinguish investment scams from cryptocurrency scams. Cryptocurrency scams are rolled up in that investment scam category. You'll notice that the investment scams over on the right, you can see the total losses. The investment scams are responsible for the largest reported losses of any fraud type. So while online shopping is by far the most frequently reported, investment scams are costing people the most money, or at least that's what our reporting data seems to suggest. But this really isn't the whole story, because we also do comparisons where we look at reports per million population, so basically reports per capita for each age group, to see what might be a trouble spot for a particular age group. And what we see is that people ages 18 to 29 are much more likely than older adults. And by older adults, I mean including people just a little bit older, people in their 30s, people in their 40s. So people ages 18 to 29 are much more likely to report job scams or employment scams, as Mel mentioned. And those young people are also much more likely to report fake check scams. So this should sound familiar because Mel basically touched on the same. So job scams do appear to be a very significant issue for this age group. We know that young people in college are actually specifically being targeted with scams that might appear to be coming from their career services office or from a trusted professor. So they're being targeted with job scams, and they are also experiencing a lot of fake check scams, which, as Mel mentioned, these fake check scams and job scams kind of go hand in hand. So that is definitely something that, if you were doing a presentation to this age group he would want to touch on. Next slide, please. So we also collect data on contact methods. And what we see with people ages 18 to 29 is that social media really jumps off the page, both in terms of the number of loss reports and in terms of the total reported losses. So we ask people where or how did the scam start? And you can see that either way we look at it, it's social media. That's the number one way. It's really kind of difficult to overstate the role of social media in scams when we're talking about this age group. And I will circle back to this and dig in a little more in just a moment. But first, if you could go to the next slide, I want to touch on payment methods. So we're also collecting data on how scammers are getting paid. And for the 18 to 29-year-old folks, payment apps and services, what people would commonly call peer-to-peer, but also things like PayPal. This is the only age group where that type of payment is actually number one in Sentinel. They're filing more reports about that than any other payment method. Number two, we have debit cards, and number three, credit cards. For the other age groups, for pretty much every other age group, payment apps or services are much further down the list, and credit cards are number one. So that's important because payment apps and debit cards are methods that have fewer protections. But with all three of these methods, I would want to point out that where they show up most are on online shopping scams. So the type of fraud and the method of payment kind of goes hand in hand. I think that makes intuitive sense, but it's still worth pointing out. So these young folks are reporting online shopping scams more than anything else, and these are the three payment methods that they're overwhelmingly reporting in association with those online shopping scams. But we also mentioned that young people are losing the most money to investment scams, and particularly cryptocurrency investment scams. And you can see that if you look over on the right, the highest losses are on bank transfers and cryptocurrency. And those losses are overwhelmingly on investment scams. It might seem strange that bank transfers would be top payment method on investment scams, but these are scams that ultimately are about cryptocurrency, yet they may not actually pay with cryptocurrency. So they may be investing by transferring money from their bank account, but believing that they're investing in cryptocurrency. So those two payment methods in terms of dollar losses are very important. And as you can see, far ahead of any other methods in terms of the aggregate reported losses. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So as I said, I wanted to circle back here to drill down a little bit more on contact methods, and particularly to focus on social media, since this is really just such a big issue for this age group. Social media is shown here in red, and phone calls are shown in blue. And if you scan down the page, you can see that with increasing age, social media decreases as a share of loss reports. At the same time, as consumers get older, phone fraud increases. So social media decreases with age, phone fraud increases with age. Phone fraud is very, very significant for people 80 and over, and between 70 and 79, but particularly 80 and over. And this may help to explain one of the things that we notice in our data year after year, which is that people 80 and over are losing far more money than younger age groups, about 3 times as much money. The median individual loss, I should say, is about 3 times higher than for other age groups. And we know that phone fraud is associated with much higher losses. These tend to be really aggressive scams involving a lot of fear, impersonation of companies, sending people to Bitcoin ATM machines, people withdrawing large amounts of cash. These are scams that often start with a phone call, and that affects the losses that people experience. So the younger people are experiencing scams starting on social media more often, whereas older people are experiencing scams starting more often with a phone call. It's probably kind of intuitive, but still might be interesting to see confirmed in our data. And we can just imagine as these young people move up in age, how this might affect our overall patterns in terms of how scams are getting started, with perhaps an increasing tendency for them to start on social media as these folks move up in age. If you could go to the next slide, please. The social media platforms people report also vary by age. So when we ask people, how did the scam start? If they say social media, we also ask them, what platform did it start on? And you can see that for very young people, 18 and 19 years old, Instagram jumps out as by far the most frequently reported platform. For the 20 to 29-year-olds, Facebook inches ahead, and then for people 30 and over, it's Facebook all the way. So thought you all might find that interesting. I'm not sure how you'll be able to apply that in outreach, but it's just one of those things people ask about, and I wanted to show you what we're seeing there. Very often, these reports about social media scams are about online shopping, where someone has seen an ad on Facebook or Instagram, they've clicked through, they've made a purchase on a website they probably never heard of before, and unfortunately they never get the goods and the website simply kind of disappears. So this gives you a deeper insight into where that's starting. If you could go to the next slide. This is a lot to take in at first, but I hope it will be a good resource for you in the future. This shows how contact methods vary by fraud type for the 18 to 29-year-olds. Fraud originating on social media is shown in red, and you can see that social media is the top contact method for most types of fraud, and especially for things like online shopping, romance scams, family friend impersonation. For this age group, those are predominantly starting on social media. But the mix of contact methods changes when you look, for example, at something like government impersonation scams. So with government impersonation scams, even for young people who are doing so much on social media, those scams are more likely to start with a phone call. So if you're doing outreach on a particular scam type, it might be helpful to refer to this so that you can also touch on the contact methods that would be relevant. Every fraud type sort of has its signature mix of contact methods, its signature mix of payment methods, and it's good to kind of weave those all together when you're covering a particular type of fraud. Next slide, please. So if you found this interesting, I did want to let you know that there's a lot more where this came from. Several years ago, we launched Explore Data, which is a suite of interactive dashboards that let you dig into Sentinel data yourself and slice and dice the data in different ways to just kind of explore and become familiar with areas that you might be particularly interested in. You may be already familiar with our annual data book. Think of this as sort of an interactive version of our data book, plus a lot more, and also it's updated every quarter, so you're getting more current data. So you can find that again at ftc.gov/explore data. Next slide, please. I'd also encourage you to check out and subscribe to our data spotlights. These do a deeper dive into trending topics, areas that we're seeing a lot of in Sentinel and that we want to get the word out about. For example, we just released a couple of weeks ago, a spotlight on the rise of scams that direct people to Bitcoin ATM machines. So we're seeing a lot of that, and we have released data about that trend in a spotlight. And if you go to ftc.gov/spotlight, you will see that we have quite a few different spotlights to focus in on different topics that may be of interest. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Kira to talk about our consumer messaging.
Hi, everyone. So as Emma mentioned, I'll focus on our messaging for consumers and what these scams can look like and our advice for avoiding them. And then I'll touch on some of the FTC's free resources. So I'll start with online shopping. As Emma discussed, younger adults report a lot of fraud related to online shopping. This can include things like your order showing up different than advertised, or damaged, or never coming at all. Scammers can pose as real or fake companies online trying to get money or personal information. So our kind of go-to messaging for online shopping is to first check out the company or product. So search online for the name of the company, plus things like review, complaint, or scam, and see what other people are saying about it. Make sure you read the seller's description of the product carefully, and then if the seller has name brand goods at really big discounts, that may be a sign that they're fakes. And second, I think Emma mentioned this, but pay by credit card. You'll get protections under federal law, and if you report it quickly, you don't have to pay for things that you ordered but didn't get. Next slide. From the data Emma presented, it's clear that job scams also significantly affect younger adults. Scammers, as many of you likely know, scammers advertise jobs the same way legitimate employers do, online or in newspapers, sometimes on the radio, TV. These are some samples of fake job ads. Words may change, but the hallmarks are big promises that aren't real, like you'll get rich quickly, working just a few hours a day. And they'll often try to get money or personal information from you, which could lead to identity theft. Next slide. Melissa mentioned this, but fake checks are often part of job scams and common across job scams. So the takeaway here is that if anyone gives you a check, tells you to deposit it, and then send some of the money back, that's a scam. Next slide. Here are some of our takeaways to avoid job scams. Never pay for the promise of a job. Honest employers, including the federal government, will never ask you to pay to get a job. Anyone who does is a scammer. Second, do some research. Search online for the name of the company or the person who is hiring you with the words scam, review, or complaint. See what other people are saying. They might have scammed other people. And then finally, take your time. So describe the offer to someone that you trust and ask what they think. Explaining the offer will also give you more time to think about it. And we have more information at ftc.gov/jobscams. Next slide. So I know we're tight on time. I will just gloss over this quickly. I'm sure many of us are familiar with business impersonators getting texts from quote unquote FedEx or UPS or the US Postal Service saying there's some problem with delivery. They could be from our, quote unquote bank account, saying there's an issue with our accounts. Next slide. This is our go-to advice for business impersonators. If you get an unexpected email from a business or a person for that matter, do not click on any links. Don't call any phone number they give you. If you think a message could be real, contact the company using a website or phone number that you looked up yourself, so not the information they give you. And remember that the government and honest businesses won't demand money from you by email, text, phone call, or a message on social media. And they won't insist that you pay with cryptocurrency by wiring money through a company like MoneyGram or Western Union, or by putting money on a gift card. Only scammers do that. Next slide. And Melissa talked a lot about investment scams, so I'll skip this slide. So the next one. Our go-to advice for investment scams. Know that all investments come with risk. There are no guarantees. Anyone who says that there's no risk with an investment is a scammer. Resist the pressure to commit quickly. Scammers want you to act fast before you have time to think or to check things out. So take your time. And then finally, don't mix online relationships with investment advice. If you meet someone on a dating site or an app and they want to show you how to invest in crypto or ask you to send them crypto, that's a scam. And we have more information at ftc.gov/investment scams. Next slide. Now I'll talk about some of the FTC's free resources. Next slide. The FTC has hundreds of free resources on scams, both in print and online. All of our materials for consumers are available in both English and Spanish. Our main hub is consumer.ftc.gov, and that has our biggest collection of articles on scams, along with videos and graphics about a whole range of consumer protection topics. The second site listed there, consumer.gov, is our most plain language of plain language sites. So it includes just the basics on things like managing your money and avoiding scams, and has a focus on action steps for people. And then finally, we have a huge collection of videos available at youtube.com/FTC videos on every type of scam you can look for. Next slide. We also launched ftc.gov/languages, which has information on scams in avoiding scams in 12 different languages. People can also report scams now in their preferred language at reportfraud.ftc.gov. Next slide. You can order free print materials with free shipping from the FTC at ftc.gov/bulk order. We have dozens of publications in English, Spanish, Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese on avoiding scams, protecting your information, and consumer rights. You can order as many copies as you need, and it's all free. Next slide. I'll end here. Scams are always changing. So to keep up with the latest from the FTC, sign up for our consumer alerts, which we put out in English and Spanish. You can do that at either of these URLs. Each alert comes with actionable messages and, for the most part, a shareable social media image or video. We also put out alerts for businesses, and with our business blog, which has advice for small business owners to avoid scams. All of our information that I've shown you, everything is in the public domain. So feel free to pull from any of our stuff and add them to your website, social media, newsletter, bulletins. You can even put your own byline on it. Back to you, Nelson.
Thank you so much, Emma and Kira. Great presentation. Also, audience, if you have questions for Emma, Kira, or Melissa and our next speakers, please type them into the question function. They are being gathered, and we will hear the questions at the end of everyone's presentations. My colleague Monica Steinish will be submitting your questions to our speakers. We're now moving on to our final segment, and our speaker will be Alexander Odeshelli, who I told you about earlier, and he will be joined by Abigail Bishop for this last segment. And Abigail, if you want to go ahead and start, I think you had some opening comments before we move into the presentation by Alexander.
Thanks so much, Nelson. Yes, I will just make some quick remarks and let Alex get into some of the meat of the work that we did together. But just to contextualize before we get started, for us at Amazon, we are really focused on protecting consumers from impersonation scams. And as the panelists before me mentioned, this is such a dynamic issue space that is changing all the time. And so we do our best to keep up with the trends that are coming through. And so when we caught wind of this changing demographic of susceptible individuals to scams being now young adults, we wanted to do something about it. Other reports, Mel's work was incredibly compelling. And there are other reports out there that cite upwards of 3 times the degree of susceptibility for young adults than other populations, which is just massive. And so we wanted to do something about this trend. And so we looked to partner with the Global Cyber Alliance. And it's really because, firstly, they're really super smart people. They know a lot about cybersecurity and cyber safety, and you'll hear from Alex and agree with me. I'm confident at their being incredibly smart, but also they are incredibly good at developing education tools. And they've done this for other topics that have sort of been problematic for other dimensions of cybersecurity. And so we worked with them to develop this resource called CyberFlex. And I'll let Nelson, let Alex get into it, Nelson. But I wanted to just kind of highlight the thing that I'm most proud of in this project is the fact that in the development of it, we worked super closely with end users. And so we worked with young adults to develop the tool, and we'll walk through some of the research and the feedback that we got directly from the young adults who helped us create it. So why don't I hand over the mic to Alex to get into it, and we'll dive into CyberFlex.
Thank you. Go ahead, Alexander.
Thank you so much, Abby, for the kind words and our continued partnership with which is extremely valued. And thank you to Consumer Action for organizing this really important topic, a topic that sometimes gets left behind when we discuss other demographics and different groups and the threats that they face online. So my presentation, as Abby mentioned, is going to be going through the work that we did over the past year in the coming together of the Global Cyber Alliance and Amazon, really at the outset of the summer of 2023, in identifying various challenges that young adults were facing online with their online safety, with a whole host of online scams that have already been presented from my counterparts at the BBB and FTC, in addition to other cyber risks, and going through what we did to produce a completely new resource that was done together with young people, for young people, to help them protect themselves online. Next slide, please, Nelson. So I'll be running through initially. I'll start off with a little bit about the Global Cyber Alliance, if some of you have not heard from us or heard about us, and then going into some of our research and data that we produced ourselves with young people and the work that we ran to understand more about different insights to help us create CyberFlex and other resources moving forward. And I'll be highlighting just a few quick things that I felt the audience and yourselves would find interesting in your work with young people, or if you're looking to create more resources to target this particular demographic. And then going through just showing you what that sort of looks like, going through outreach methods that can be tricky in terms of reaching to young adults, and how we're currently doing that, what we did with the launch, and what future plans are, in addition to some key lessons and takeaways from our work over the past year. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about us. The Global Cyber Alliance is an international nonprofit. We were founded in 2015, which is a coming together of a number of different founding organizations that, such as the New York District Attorney's Office, the City of London Police, and the Center for Internet Security, that looked into this growing, just alarming rates of international cybercrime, and understanding what could be done about the challenge. The founding partners, provided the foundation, the resources, the funding, and the initial expertise to set us up as an independent nonprofit comprised of a board, strategic advisors, and crucially, our work that is done with key partners such as Amazon and others as well, in delivering a secure and trustworthy internet that enables social and economic progress for all. We do that through two programs, one of which is the Internet Integrity Program that focuses on the supply side of the internet. So thinking of things like routing security, internet security, IoT data, and the maintenance or the registration and the proliferation and what we're trying to do is the mitigation and restriction of malicious domains that get registered to fool people, to take them to malicious sites and therefore affect their devices and networks. And then the other side of things is, the other program is the Capacity and Resilience Program. And through the Capacity and Resilience Program, we focus on identified communities, their challenges, and we produce very specific, actionable, accessible, free resources, globally applicable, translated in different languages, that those communities could use to help protect themselves. So prior to CyberFlex and the work that we did with young adults, we've worked with different organizations to produce the cybersecurity toolkit for small businesses, individuals, election officials, journalists, and small other nonprofits, in addition to a number of other tools and resources as well. Next slide, please. So just going into our research methodology, just a little bit, and what we did to get some of the insights I'll be diving into shortly. When we came together with Abby and her team and Amazon, and we kept seeing, we were identifying the challenge of online scams and their effects at young adults. We were trying to track lots of different data pieces, not just in the US. And I'm pretty glad that the other panelists from BBB and FCC presented before me, because we were tracking data that came out from their reports that was raising this issue and bucking the mainstream perception that young adults may be more secure online because they were raised in the information age. Whereas, as Mel was highlighting in her initial presentation, they may be more exposed or maybe more susceptible especially across different scam types, and increasingly more so because they are using the internet more so. And we try to understand why that is. So the GCA had done work with young adults in the past to some extent, but This was a new endeavor where we really felt like we had to engage with them directly. So we launched a global survey that was deployed towards the end of the summer of last year into the fall. We facilitated 2 focus groups that had, in September of last year, that had really good international representation from diverse students, young professionals in Europe, Asia Pacific, and in other places as well. And then we kept trying to pick up more data points, such as the ones highlighted by FCC and BBB, but also in other geographies. So in the UK, in the Asia Pacific, in Australia, in developing countries, where they were noting similar things. So I will say the insights I'm going to be going into are really intended primarily for product design, and I'll be going into what that product became. Key to these insights is we were constantly trying to understand the difference between opinions, cybersecurity practices, knowledge, and other aspects between young adults between the ages of 18 to 25 in high income countries and also low and middle income countries, as we were looking to create something that was really globally applicable, that could be translated in lots of different places. Eventually will be contextualized and localized, but essentially trying to understand how online scams are targeting young people in lots of different contexts. So in this presentation, we'll be going through a few key figures and quotes, and then I will mention, as a limitation, the extent of our research wasn't quite as broad as one of my counterparts at the FTC presented in their findings, but it allowed us to get really quality insights from our engagement, from a few hundred responses on our survey, and some good in-depth responses across a diverse group that participated in our focus groups. Next slide, please. So just some key figures and headlines that I want to highlight here. You'll see the 66% of our responses or our respondents in our survey had experienced impersonation scams, which we found to be a pretty big issue that we had to address in our messaging and coping mechanisms and different ways in which we can get people to increase their cyber hygiene and look out for various things to protect themselves, help them protect themselves in these cases. And then, I think some of the other presenters may have touched on notes of confidence or overconfidence, but one of the, and I'll delve into the confidence aspect a bit more in a bit more detail. But one of the things that we did really look for is that figure on the right-hand side, which is 51% did not report online scams or fraud that they had experienced. And then as we got deeper into that, we found that there were layers of complexity, from confusion or not knowing where to report, or lack of trust in local reporting authorities to do anything about this. So all of these figures, these are some of the key figures that sort of caught our eye, but essentially things that we really try to focus on as we create this new resource. Next slide, please, Nelson. So jumping into a little bit on the confidence angle, and there's a lot of data on this screen. I don't have too much time. I'll talk about them at a very high level. I believe you can access the slide deck after the webinar as well. But this is one of the key themes that we kept picking up over and over again in our survey, in our focus groups, and in lots of other research that we were reading. There were a few reports highlighted on this slide as well from CyberSafe and Airbnb and other areas in other geographies that Gen Z and young adults felt like they were pretty confident, or you could say overconfident in their ability to identify and avoid scams or fraudulent activities online, which could be one of the reasons that many of them may be falling in pitfalls where you might think that you have the ability to understand, this isn't going to trick me, and you may be clicking on something on Instagram or other places that you encounter in your email, and then you end up either losing money or having your devices or accounts hacked, or devices infiltrated by bad actors as well. So there's a few recommendations down below that we sort of use internally, but I felt like could be useful for the audience as well, in terms of the types of confidence, rather the types of content and the messaging that would be important to highlight as we work with young adults to help them protect themselves and curb that sense of overconfidence, perhaps, and maybe check themselves at times to double think whether that link might be legitimate, or it may be pointing them towards a malicious site by bad actors. Next slide, please. So this is a really interesting exercise that we did, which was a mixture of a survey as well as a focus group. So we asked young adults how they would suggest, or what they would suggest to other young adults, their peers, their friends, or their family members, their siblings, of how they would protect themselves. And what I want to highlight here, I'll let everybody read for themselves. I think there's some interesting clusters that come up about gut checking and using common sense, and then like really practical advice about cyber hygiene. But the key thing I want to highlight here is that peer-to-peer messaging and slogans in everything that one does, an organization does, or an expert individual does to reach out to young people is extremely key, and something that we carried forward in our messaging, which is why we worked so closely with young people, as I'll talk about momentarily moving forward, for CyberFlex as well. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick quote that I really liked, some really practical advice that came out of one of, this may have been a survey, but we also had really interesting insights also from our focus group participants, as well as to how people could protect themselves. Next slide. And I talked a little bit about reporting earlier, so I won't go into too much detail about this, but this was really an issue or an area that we were trying to understand and unpack about behaviors of young adults, how they're reporting, did they report, what the issue of underreporting or not reporting was. And as I mentioned earlier, there were just a couple of points, and for me personally, one of the interesting things, especially outside of high-income countries, more in developing countries and low and middle-income countries, was the lack of trust in local reporting authorities. So we had a question such as, do you believe that your local reporting authority is able to carry forward your report or do something about it? And there are many instances in South and Southeast Europe and other parts of Asia Pacific where there was some interesting qualitative data coming out from the responses to say that they just didn't feel like their reports were either heard, or they had the resources or the ability to actually track down perpetrators. Next slide, please. So I just found this analogy really interesting. Another piece of advice to young people that came out of our focus groups. I love this analogy of, there's nothing worse than waiting on the phone for the doctor for who isn't picking up when you need them. So this touches on that reporting aspect. It has to be simple and accessible for people to use it. And again, something to note, and something that we noted as we carried forward in our messaging. Next slide, please. So finally, from our data, I want to highlight this aspect of engaging in informational resources and materials. So there's a mixture of information that we were trying to find here. One, the lengths that young adults went to seek out informational resources to improve their cybersecurity or online safety, as well as where they were just exposed to it. So if they received it at university or online, on social media. And in addition to that, not quite reflected on this slide, but I did want to highlight some information that we got, or insights that we got from how young people just digested information as well, which is really key to us. And you'll see why as we go into the website, and as I show the website. It allowed us to understand that, to early presenters' points, like social media is really key. Like on the one hand, they may be receiving, scam attempts, or be more susceptible, or being touched by scammers, or being accessed by scammers rather, more so on social media rather than other places, but also an opportunity for an organization that provides informational resources to help young people protect themselves, to promote it on social media, and in what formats. So is it text, is it short form video, or other areas? If you're trained, do you like animation? Do you like someone talking to you? Like all this sort of information we try to understand. And it comes as no surprise, as one of the biggest highlights is that young people like short form video over text, or some other resources as well. Next slide, please. So with all of these insights, we round up the research towards the middle of fall of last year, and we really got to the product development side of things to create a new resource. So I will touch just very quickly on the online safety page that we launched in November of last year, as we understood these pain points, challenges, and ways that we could get through to them. And we didn't want to miss a key online shopping window, for instance, where they may be susceptible online, which is a very simple landing page, just very brief, highlighting key resources, tools they may be using that we launched earlier. But the real end goal that we work towards is CyberFlex. So I realize that this is hyperlinked, but for those that are interested, you can reach CyberFlex, the website at gcacyberflex.org, which is a global, robust, mobile-forward, interactive online resource that we launched in June 14th of 2024. And this website, I'll show momentarily, includes free tools, interactive guides, text alerts, and a whole host of features to raise awareness, shift attitudes about online risk, and provide easy steps to help young adults protect themselves and share their stories. We did so really, really closely with young adults. Everything from the name that you see to the color palettes. We didn't know what we were going to call this. This was vetted by a small advisory council that we had from different countries that helped us understand things were and weren't cringe-worthy or resonated with young people. And I will just quickly mention a first translation is being planned in Q1 of 2025 coming up. Next slide, please. So just a few screenshots to help you understand what the website looks like. You'll see the home page on the very left-hand side of the screen, and you'll see a number of different features, from chatbots to tickers at the top that give you updated alerts. And then one of the things that you may be experiencing is maybe a sensory overload at times with colors and imagery, but this was exactly the types of images, the types of colors, the types of features and emojis, and all these different icons that young people told us that were resonating with them. We have a number of different features that allow you to test your knowledge, again, going to that overconfidence aspect to understand if you really know as much as you think you do. And then at the very top, you'll see the resources screenshot. This is really the bread and butter that GCA focuses on, which is directing people to specific free and accessible tools alongside the grounds of basic cyber hygiene, where to report, how to recover, as well as you'll see on the right-hand side, a function to allow young people to share their stories and get over this, break through this stigma or shame of being impacted or actually falling victim as a scam survivor or scam victim, in order to help others and help themselves, and ultimately to reduce the efficacy of scammers and tie into that peer-to-peer messaging aspect as well. Next slide, please. So just quickly, in terms of promotion and distribution, you'll see a variety of different ways that we're really trying to reach young people. As we launched, we had a really great network of key partners and stakeholders, from nonprofits to corporates to academic institutions, where we felt that they had a young consumer bases or youth members and others that where young people would comprise a significant portion of their following, and we have a big social media following. So you'll see on the right hand side, we have influencer marketing, where we have original videos by influencers. We've done webinars, in addition to increasingly in-person events and conferences, especially as we come up to cybersecurity months and through the end of the year. You'll see in the bottom left-hand side a really great key partner that recently promoted CyberFlex, also helped us with inputs to CyberFlex, but promoted CyberFlex in the University of Lagos in Nigeria at the recent Gen Z Summit as well. Next slide, please. So some very quick just takeaways as I round out. I really would encourage all organizations to, as you think about working with young people, work with young people to uncover your own insights. From the outset, and continue engagement beyond these initial phases as well. Create those feedback loops to help you understand what's resonating, what's working if you do create new products or resources, informational resources, with the line of co-designing initiatives and products. And make things as relevant and incorporating recent trends, staying flexible for updates as things will change quite rapidly as well. I'll also encourage people to lean into digital comms and engagement. Again, as I mentioned earlier, social media is a key place where scammers are reaching out to young people, but also young people could receive information to help them protect themselves. And then I won't touch on some of the other aspects, but I will really stress that authenticity and authenticity in messaging while working with young people, so that you're not perceived as older cybersecurity experts or consumer protection experts that might be out of touch with how young people speak or understand these issues, is really key. And working with young people really allowed us to do that. So next slide, please. And with that, I'd like to round out. I'm sorry if I went a minute or two over my timeline, but I'll hand it over to Abigail to just close us out.
Thanks, Alex. I'll keep it brief because I know we're running out of time here. But just 3 things from me as we close on this, and an ask from us. 1, please use CyberFlex. Please go to the website, poke around, and secondly, share it with your networks and give us feedback. If there's things that you think we could change or plug in or include, would love that feedback. And that really ties to the 3rd thing, which is we are, even though it's been sort of a partnership between the Global Cyber Alliance and Amazon, it is not an exclusive relationship. We are very, very interested in working with others. And so sort of extend an invitation to everyone on this webinar and beyond, that if you are interested in working with us on this tool to improve it and make it more impactful, we are really keen to do that. So with that, thank you for listening and for staying on through this presentation, and I'll hand over to Nelson.
Great, thank you, Abigail and Alex. And yeah, everyone will be getting the slide deck, so they'll definitely be able to visit the tools that were included in the presentation. And we're going to move into questions. I think we should plan on, just so that we can get some good questions in and maybe a little bit of feedback, let's plan on going over just 6, 7, maybe 8 minutes, just so we can have some questions. We will have everything recorded, and people will be able to watch it too afterwards on our YouTube page. So Monica, if you're out there, do you have questions from our audience?
I'm here, and yes, we have some really good questions from participants, and I know time is limited, so let's dive in. First, for Emma and Kira, can you explain what happens after a consumer reports a scam or fraud to the FTC? How is that information used, and can you share how it might result in successful enforcement actions or give any examples?
I can take that one. So when consumers report to FTC, they do get customized tips based on what they reported. So that's what happens immediately. To benefit that consumer, they'll get tips depending on what type of scam it was, what their payment method was, even what the contact method was. Of course, in many instances, the money is gone. I don't want to overstate that we have tips that can always make the difference for that consumer, unfortunately. We immediately add that report to the Sentinel database, so it immediately becomes available to all levels of law enforcement to use in investigations. And as you can imagine, there are vast numbers of scams out there, and it's a matter of sort of connecting the dots to build a case, to build support for pursuing a particular target. So the more reports we have, the more we can connect the dots to do that. So the reporting is extremely important, and the volume of reports is important for us to be able to build out investigations and identify targets where we have the data we need to pursue. So I can't really speak to specific cases, but I can say that while Sentinel is not a database geared toward giving individual responses to consumers, I mean, we do give our automated, customized, advice at the end of reporting, but the idea is not that each consumer is going to get a personal response and personal assistance. The idea is that this consumer will have contributed to larger law enforcement efforts to tackle scams. And I know from research that many consumers, if not most consumers who report, ultimately that is a major goal, that they would have contributed to the solution.
Great, thank you, Emma.
Sure.
Alexander, you touched on this in your presentation when you mentioned the statistic that 51% of 18 to 25-year-olds didn't report online scams or frauds they experienced. Could you provide any insight into why different age groups do not report being scammed? And I'm not sure if it's only young people specifically, but that seems particularly high.
Yeah, sure thing. And I'm sure other panelists will have some thoughts on this as well. But, I think I touched on this earlier in some of my remarks. One of the things that we try to solve through CyberFlex with a feature is a share your story, where we try to have people share their experience with scams that sort of goes towards like shame and stigma of being impacted into scams. So I think one of the really key things why people don't report scams is they sort of like keep it to themselves. They might not feel that they might be embarrassed that they were gotten or lost a little bit of money. It might be a normal amount of money. It might not be a huge amount of money. Other reasons might be that, again, as I mentioned, there may be areas or jurisdictions or even companies where users or citizens feel like their reports sort of don't go anywhere. So if they feel like a report is just going into a database and maybe nothing is being done with it, maybe they won't get their money back initially or immediately or see tangible impact of that report. It might stop people, you know, putting that report forward as well into that particular authority. And then I would also say, you know, any efforts they may also be feeling, and we saw some of that as well in our survey responses and focus groups, is that reporting features or reporting know-how, how to report, might not be just readily accessible. It's something that we're really trying to fix with CyberFlex, and a guide that we have. It's sort of like an interactive quiz, but it sort of acts like a guide of helping you understand about reporting and recovery. Is that they might not have that like ready-made link of where to report or how to report on a specific platform, or know that there is a cybersecurity authority in their country, in their state, in their city, that might be which might be a place that you might be able to report as well. So I think those are just some issues, but I think there's a whole host of complex barriers that they might be experiencing as well. And again, really not that specific to young people. This could be an issue for a lot of other age groups too.
Great, thanks, Alex. Hopefully all these efforts will result in more reporting. Melissa, while you were talking about the various types of scams, one of our participants asked about car sales scams, which young people buying their first car could be particularly susceptible to. She says she saw an offer in which a car seller was asking for a deposit to hold the car, and then they would be willing to accept payments. And I couldn't tell from the person who wrote the question whether this is a private seller or a dealer. Does that on the surface sound like a scam? And are car sales scams common? And what do they look like normally?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I haven't gotten that one before. I mean, I would say anytime somebody is asking for an upfront payment of any sort, before, you know, you see something like this is big with puppy scams, for example, that those are rampant, right? This upfront payment that you need to do. So I would say the one thing I would say is we're actually in the middle of doing a new research project on military consumers, which includes young service members. And one of the things we did find out in that report is in our complaints data, which is different than our scam data. And so a complaint is against a legitimate business. So those are issues that you report and then you work with the BEV to resolve them. We found a very high percentage of issues with car dealerships and with that, and they were younger people. So it sounds like a scam to me, and I would be very, very careful. But there's also I think that industry in general has some pretty big issues with younger ages from what we're seeing from our business complaints as well.
Okay, thanks. Emma or Kira, I think this would be for you. If someone is scammed out of money through a, like Venmo or Zelle transaction, how do they get their bank to restore those funds? And since the banks contend that they're not responsible for that kind of fraud.
Emma, do you want to take
Go
this
ahead,
or
Kara.
I can?
You go
Okay,
ahead.
I would, I'll just share on my end. This is not my area of expertise, but we do have resources, including a page that breaks down if you've been scammed, who to contact given the payment method, which I would direct people to. Emma, I don't know if you have a more specific answer.
No, just to say that we're well aware of that issue, that banks contend that they're not responsible, and I think it's an important one. And the question kind of answered itself, that the consumers are quite limited in what they can do currently.
Okay, thank you. Now this one I think is for everyone. With so many scams perpetrated via social media, how can a person who has social media accounts prevent account takeover, where someone takes over their account and uses it to perpetrate scams on others?
This is Melissa. I can try to take that one, because that's a little different than somebody basically connecting on social media. I think being careful who you connect with. So accepting friend requests, for example, from people you don't know is one thing you can do. And also just being careful in general of what you're posting on social media. But the more connections you have, the better chance they can see personal information and they can get into your account potentially. I'm less able to speak to the technology aspects of how they take over things, but in terms of prevention, I think just being really careful about, connecting with people that you don't know on the types of social media where you have private and public accounts that are different. But I defer if someone else has other things that they might want to contribute there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of points as well. Yeah, I'm no social media expert, but I really would urge all users, non-specific platform. I don't want to call out any specific platforms here, but for them to be aware of the security and privacy protocols that they have available to them from that platform that they use. And this really goes back to just thinking about your basic cyber hygiene principles. Like that on the one hand, you can think about things that you can do to stop yourself, being cautious. Mel highlighted a couple of things, being aware of different tactics and not falling to them. On the other, just maintain, as kind of like home maintenance, so maintain good account practices, have strong passwords, set up 2FA. 2FA, multi-factor authentication, is just one of the single most effective ways to protect your accounts, your data, your integrity, your information, because if someone does guess your password, takes over your account, you have 2FA set up on your device, that person won't be able to log in as you, because that you'll be receiving the code and they wouldn't, or whatever that second step of verification is. So again, I would just urge people to look into those security measures that those platforms provide, and then practice those basic cyber hygiene principles, and be careful out there and look out for those cues. Look out for other accounts that may have been compromised through your friends, as Mel mentioned, that might be looking to reach out to you through false messaging, false urgency, might be getting you to click on links, and then avoid clicking on unknown links, or putting in information in those websites if you do click on them and get directed towards them as well. So I hope they're just a few simple tips, but I hope they prove useful for anybody that might find themselves in that situation.
Yeah, I'm sure those will be helpful tips for the listeners. This is for anybody who might have some insight about this, but there's an obvious and necessary focus on educating consumers about how to recognize and avoid scams. But do you see any law enforcement or tech tools on the horizon that would help prevent scammers from reaching their targets in the first place, kind of like the Nomo Robo phone tool that was invented to block spam calls and texts, or anything that would lead to greater success in stopping and catching the scammers, so it's not all on the consumers?
I can speak to a little bit of that from Amazon's perspective. The good news is that when you're shopping on Amazon, consumers are safe. We have wizards behind the curtain who are working very diligently to ensure that accounts are safe and that you're protected as you shop. And we're continuing to develop tools and resources in real time right now that are going to continue to improve our ability to take the guesswork out of it for consumers. And we sort of openly acknowledge that we not just at Amazon, but across the board, we're placing too much on the shoulders of consumers to keep themselves safe, right? You could just go through the myriad of tips and caveats and cautions that we've collectively on this panel gone through, and it's too much. And we need to do more to figure out how we can take the guesswork out of it for consumers. And so we're working on developing tools that help to make it easier for customers to ensure that it's really us when we're communicating with our customers. One of the just very tactical examples that I could put out there that has been very helpful is email verification technology that Amazon adopted a year or so ago, which when you receive an email from Amazon, you will see the Amazon logo and the Amazon.com email address kind of accompanying that, and that sort of validates that that's an authentic email from Amazon. So for right now, there's tools like that are making incremental progress, but we certainly, along with everyone else on this call, we have some serious work to do to continue to take the guesswork out of it for consumers.
This is Emma. I just wanted to add that the FTC put out a report that you can find at ftc.gov/older-adults. There is a report as part of the Stop Senior Scams Act that was put out on scam prevention research. You'll find it on that page, ftc.gov/older-adults. And it's a review of scam prevention messaging research. And one of the reason I'm highlighting it here is I just want to emphasize that when we reviewed and we did an extensive review of research specifically on scam prevention messaging, but also research that was peripherally related to scam prevention messaging. And the overarching takeaway is that this is really hard to do. People don't remember things. People don't pay attention to things. People don't think it will happen to them, perhaps particularly young people. And education can't be the only answer. Behind the scenes methods are essential, and we know that industry can be quite ingenious in coming up with solutions, and we're kind of hoping that we'll see more of that, because I think it is going to be critically important. I've worked in scam prevention for a long time, and I knew education had its challenges, but when you really dig into the research on this, it's even more daunting than you might expect. It's just very, very easy for people to forget or not pay attention in the first place. Or even if they do retain your information, the scammers are just so good at creating this heightened sense of alarm, urgency, emotional response. It can become difficult for people to recall in the moment what it is they need to do or what they need to be alert to. So coming at this from a consumer education side is very important. We're not going to stop. We shouldn't stop, but we also need to look at other approaches.
All right, thank you for that. I think this probably is an appropriate last question. It obviously represents how helpful this webinar was to all the listeners, because they're asking, how can we get in contact with the speakers to get them to present with our agency? So I don't know if you all have any contact info that you'd like to provide.
This is Kira. I'm happy to provide my contact information with whomever. Our division does a lot of presentations with different groups, so we're always looking for opportunities.
Would they just find you by going to the FTC website? Is there an easy way for them to just get to the right place?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm able to add things in the chat, but
Okay.
Nelson or whomever, feel free to add my email in the chat.
Okay.
Yep,
You can add
likewise.
mine as well, Nelson.
And my
Same
email
here.
in the slide deck as well. And people are welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn. As Abby mentioned earlier, we really welcome all outreach with regards to CyberFlex or anything else as well.
Yes. Find me on LinkedIn. Would love to be connected.
Great. Thank you. Nelson, I think that's it, and back to you.
Thank you, Monica, for going through those questions. Thank you, audience. Thank you, speakers, for hanging in there. Some extra time, overtime here to get through the material. We wanted to have a little bit of a discussion for sure. And if anyone, you'll be able to reach them, reach our speakers. But if you can't, reach out to me. Everyone has my email, and I'll connect you as well. Just a couple of slides here to wrap up. I want to remind everybody, Consumer Action is a nonprofit. We offer all our webinars for free. If you care to provide any kind of financial support, we, of course, always welcome it with the contact information here. And you'll get this by email. And then you can also support us simply by subscribing to our YouTube channel. That would be very helpful, and following us on our social media pages. So we encourage you to do that. I think we dropped in the direct link in the chat earlier. Thank you everyone for being on. This has been a great discussion. We're gonna have to come back and do this again. I'm sure we'll have new scams to talk about soon, unfortunately. So we wanna come back and inform everybody. Thank you for being on, and we can shut down the webinar at this time. Thanks so much. See everyone next time.